Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our In Conversation for our current exhibition, The Patient Will See You Now by Áine O'Hara. A little bit about the exhibition. The Patient Will See You Now is an interactive installation and one-to-one performance work, focusing on the inadequacies and farcical nature of assessing healthcare in Ireland. The work questions and exposes bureaucracies that oppress those who fall outside certain definitions of normal, valuable and productive. Áine was this year's recipient of We Only Want the Earth's first project award in partnership with Fire Station Artist Studios, Dublin Central Housing Action and consulting artist Kerry Guinan. We Only Want the Earth 2020 was A4 Sound's 12-month programme of awards, exhibitions and events aimed to interrogate the goals, and continues to, the goals and strategies of social change. What kind of society do we want and how should we get there? Áine's work experiments with form and focuses on connection, conversation and care. Their long-term ambitions include demanding adequate access to theatre and the arts of disabled and marginalised communities through the creation of large-scale, ambitious work, as well as the continuation of community-building projects such as Chronic Chats. And this was a project, a creative and social group for chronically ill people, which grew from the research at this residency. Áine is joined today by Siobhán Clancy, and Siobhán is a visual artist that typically focuses on social health. Working with other artists, activists, youth, community and women's groups, her collaboration practice reflects an interest in collectivity and participatory democracy. It is located in institutional, public and cultural spaces. The outcomes typically materialise as multimedia works, immersive events, participatory performances, dialogues, play and live action in contexts of health, education and justice. Siobhán currently works as Community Arts Coordinator in Cork City Arts Office. We also have allowed for some Q&A at the end of the conversation. So there's this little button at the end of your screen and it says Q&A. So do pop in your questions there and we hope to get to them at the end of the conversation. So I'll now hand you over to Áine O'Hara and Siobhán Clancy.
Thanks so much, Evelyn. Firstly, welcome everybody. We imagine that some people have joined at this point and we hope that people will join throughout this Zoom exhibition discussion. As Evelyn said, you're very welcome to insert any questions that might come up for you during the course of the discussion into the chat function. There's a lot to cover. The work that we're speaking about is so rich on so many levels, so I'm really looking forward to discussing that with Áine. So just to say, we may not get to all of the questions that are raised today, but we certainly hope that we'll touch on a number of them in the discussion and come to them at the end if we can. So firstly, just to say thanks for the wonderful introductions, Evelyn. It's really great to be able to connect with A4 Sounds long distance in this virtual world. I'm delighted to be here. Today I'm in, the capacity I'm in is in a personal capacity as an artist and as someone with an enormous interest in Áine O'Hara's work. Any opinions that I'm about to share today are definitely my own, and that's no relationship to any other roles or practice. And I am delighted to start the discussion, despite the fact that later today there will be a match that Mayo are about to play where they royally thrashed Tipperary earlier in the month. What a shame, but yes, we'll try and put that aside on, yeah. Let's talk about the art. So look, I'm really interested to know more about what motivated you to take up this residency at A4 Sounds earlier this year. It's been a long year. We got there. In the end. And in particular, I'm sure that people are curious to know what was it that prompted you to tackle the subject matter of The Patient Will See You Now. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about the subject matter and what those motivations were.
Yeah, so I suppose at the end of last year, I was looking for somewhere to like continue my work, and some way of, I suppose, like staying in Dublin and continuing to work as an artist with a chronic illness. So I saw the call out for the We Only Want the Earth program residencies and was really excited by them. And I thought that my work would fit really well within A4 as an institution. And so I suppose that's why I applied for their residency. And second of all, the work is kind of, as part of my chronic illnesses, and especially as part of having chronic pain, I, I've had to research an awful lot myself and kind of become like an expert in many different illnesses and conditions and treatments. And I suppose like it was very natural for me for this research to turn into something creative. It happened very naturally. I think it's like the way that I have generally responded to a lot of research is to create creative work. And yeah, it just happened very organically that I wanted to turn this research into kind of performance and installation work, because I guess it helped me feel like there was some hope, or it helped me feel like there was another outcome for me in this, because I was feeling very like disheartened by my um, progress or lack of progress within a healthcare structure. So I suppose it was a way for me to use all of this information that I had to share kind of my experiences and the experiences of others, within, like, especially for people who live with chronic pain.
It's quite something as an artist who works on a lot of different themes and a lot of subject matter, and collaborates with different artists at all times, to kind of bring your personal experience into a substantial residency like this. And I think it's a residency where there's kind of been a bit of reciprocation in terms of learning. And I know that one of the outcomes has been an access charter within A4 Sounds. And I wonder if you might just take a minute to kind of explain that piece around the charter itself, what it means, and also what kind of were the motivations there for yourself and possibly other artists that it might make a difference to.
Yeah, so I suppose I've like had some bad experiences, as I'm sure many disabled people and disabled artists have had, accessing art. And like I'm privileged in many ways, in terms of my access needs, but there's often very little awareness of access beyond beyond things like a ramp, I suppose, is like the most common thing that I see. And even then they're not truly accessible, or it feels like it's more to tick a box rather than anything else. So I suppose it was something that I brought up early on with A4. And I think that it's important to have conversations about access, even if, because like say this is sort of this hasn't been an organization that has a ton of money, and sometimes I think that smaller organizations are afraid that if they start to talk about this, like they don't have the money to back it up. But I think it's much better to do everything that you can instead of sort of just waiting for some sort of hypothetical big amount of money to come in. So I suppose we've spoken a lot about flexibility in terms of timelines and meetings and stuff like that. And they've been like more supportive than anyone I've ever worked with before, in terms of just believing me when I say that I can't work today, or I need to reschedule, which I think is such a small thing, but can be really, really important if you're working with chronically ill or disabled people, is just to not question it and just know that if I'm telling you that I can't come in, that was a huge process for me, and I really want to, and kind of questioning that really just makes me want to not work with you or work in the industry. So yeah, I suppose we've been working together to try and make some changes within the organization that would make it more accessible as much as is possible. And yeah, it's like made me more hopeful for working with other organizations in the future. Just because they've like listened to what I've been saying, and also actually put a lot of things in place. Like, no one is perfect. But there's definitely been some like big changes.
It sounds like, you know, it's a significant process. So the I guess the hosts of the residency stand to gain so much from the artists that they support, in terms of how they can then create an environment that's more conducive to very exciting work, I think. And I think that's really relevant to the current context. There's probably no way that we could get through a discussion without mentioning COVID, but that has had a huge impact on the arts sector generally, and artists in particular. And while your work doesn't explicitly touch on that experience, certainly the impact of your exhibition timeline was affected. So I understand that the installation went up during the summer, but it was only accessible to the public, for example, in December. And that can be so difficult for both their institution and the workers within that art space institution, and the artist yourself, in terms of how you then progress through other work while maintaining an art piece throughout that time. So it's been a pretty tumultuous year, but there seems to be a lot of kind of value in the piece of work that had to be done around that. So coming to the exhibition itself, Jack Clancy talks a lot about the aestheticization of common experience. For me, the patient will see you now aestheticizes a very common experience, that of chronic pain that you've mentioned, Áine. But that's not necessarily, well, it is common. It's not necessarily one that many people know about, and partly because it's still not quite acknowledged in health and other kind of social and other fields. So like, I'd love to hear about the aesthetic decisions you made in the placement and presentation of each piece in that installation space. And for everybody that's listening here, just so you know, there is an ongoing live stream of the installation that you can access really easily on the A4 Sounds website. If people want to, you can even be live streaming on one window while you're listening to us chat in another, so you kind of get the full experience. But you know, that's I know many galleries have had to make their shows more accessible in this particular time, but it's I guess another level also of where your consideration behind the accessibility of this work came in, Áine. So yeah, if you can tell us more about the placement and presentation of the pieces, and I'm also interested in how the installation format that you chose relates to your practice, knowing as I do that you have a background in theatre and set design and those areas.
Yeah, well, I think that my work is always coming from like a very theatrical place, just from my own like personal interests and like work history. But I really wanted to use that theatricality to show people, especially those who maybe have not experienced chronic illness, the kind of experience that I have when I enter a waiting room or a doctor's office, whether that's like my GP or within like a hospital setting. So the idea was to kind of create, like, I'm obsessed with chairs and sort of comfort, mostly because as part of fibromyalgia, I have this sort of, there's like, I think it's allodynia is the name for it, but it's like when even the slightest pressure causes pain. So I have like a really complex experience and relationship with seating and chairs and things like that. And often within many of the waiting rooms that I visited, they're like the worst chairs possible. Like it seems like they've almost planned it so that they will be uncomfortable. I don't think that they have, but so I was kind of looking to create like a sculptural piece that would kind of attempt to get across the level of discomfort that I feel in those spaces. So for anyone that hasn't seen the work, there are 2 rows of chairs that are kind of at an angle. So they're deliberately made to be very uncomfortable. And in that side of the installation, I suppose we focused a lot on lighting design to kind of create like a heightened experience of interrogation, I suppose, and represent the kind of feelings that I have in those spaces. And yeah, I suppose I was trying to use that to especially get people who haven't experienced a lot of those health settings and their aesthetics to experience what I feel in those spaces. What was the next bit of the question?
Well, just commenting on that, first to say that I was lucky enough to be able to visit the show, and you're kind of explaining how these pieces worked now, but you know, it really worked on such a subtle physical level as somebody in the exhibition space, where at first, if you're not paying attention, you don't even realize that these seats are out of kilter until your body has to adjust itself to the discomfort that it causes, you know. And I guess it kind of that awareness comes to you physically and experientially before the kind of the understanding comes as well. And it certainly seems that for me, certainly, because we've spent months talking about the work and your experiences and the kind of like history of where these pieces have come from. It was literally only when I was in that room and sitting in those chairs that it started to register with me. And I feel like it takes a physical awareness to really understand that. And when I was sitting in those chairs, I was observing then what else was in the room. So there was a consultation space, which I know you're going to tell us a little bit about in a little while. There was a video piece, and as there often is a monitor and waiting spaces, but this video piece had something very particular about it that you absorb as a person waiting in that room. And then there were a number of posters as well. And those posters for me, they kind of spoke to this, I guess, what's sometimes called and has been called by an art and activist group, BAVO, over-identification, where you take a kind of, you know, a key message that's being shared within society. But when you show that in the context of where people are coming from, it actually comes across how kind of extreme and dismissive it might be. And one of the posters that jumps out to me was something along the lines of, sure, COVID only kills people with disabilities. Be grand, you know. There was very a phrase I learned in April Science during the year, on the nose. A few of those pieces.
I think that like that's probably the only place COVID is mentioned, but obviously the aesthetics of the work can't be like removed from what's happening at the moment. I suppose like that poster in like particular, I guess I'm trying to use humor in the piece, and I'm trying to like get across my personality as well in the piece, and also the way that we as disabled people often use humor to keep us going through difficult experiences. That particular poster, I suppose, was taken from kind of the news reporting on, you know, you will hear like this many people died from COVID, but they had underlying conditions, which is something that is very like insulting almost to us, because you know, you're still killed by the virus. If I walk outside and I'm hit by a car, I'm killed by the car. I have several chronic illnesses, but that sort of like, yeah, so I just wanted, I suppose, to draw attention to that kind of messaging and how insulting it is. And sort of, especially when we're talking about like reopening, and everyone is so bored, and we all deserve to socialize and stuff, but for many of us that's not an option like we can't leave. There's no, it isn't a case of just getting on with it. It's like it's like our lives are at risk. So yeah, I suppose I was just trying to sort of be aware of how the installation and exhibition is like related to, as much as I mightn't have planned it to be, is related to like the current pandemic, and also to just kind of make people aware of how disabled people are being dismissed and forgotten even more than usual during this time.
Thanks, Áine. And just to say for everybody listening, when we're using phrases like disability and disabled, I guess that we'd like people to know that we're making a very conscious decision about the context in which we're using them. Áine and I will kind of share an understanding that society disables people, and that's why we tend to use the term disabled and disabilities when we're kind of talking directly about a specific experience. But what's interesting for me, Áine, in our previous conversations, and really came to the fore in the exhibition as well, was how health, the history of our healthcare system in Ireland has been based on health inequality, which counters all kind of understanding. So there's that contemporary piece around the current narrative, the current health crisis that we're all in. But that ties, I think, very neatly to the video piece. And I won't ask you to dwell too much on that, because people can see that for themselves. But maybe you might lastly like to finish on the consultation space and just let people know what was happening there.
Yeah, so just really quickly, the video piece mentions the history of the Irish service and how it was formed, and especially talks about the Irish hospital sweepstakes, which was a lottery set up to fund the hospitals back when we became a free state. And kind of abdicated responsibility a little bit from the government in a way that they have continued to do through the funding of different bodies and through using like private companies and insurance companies to kind of manage things separate to being in charge of it themselves fully. I suppose that I was trying to talk about the kind of cultural inadequacies that are there, and kind of how like especially in terms of pain, many people are disbelieved for a really long time, and like it kind of, it's like very present for people who are women, or like people who have whose sex is female, and even more so is like, it gets even more difficult if you're not white or you're not cis. And I was trying to, I suppose, like talk about how relevant all of our culture and how our society runs is in accessing healthcare and accessing treatment, and even accessing just belief that you are in pain. And then within the consultation space, I suppose as part of the performance, I had conversations with people about their experiences, if they wanted to share those with me, and also about the idea of care and whether or not, or where there is care within our health system, and if we can ever make care a priority, like, well, we still have all of these hierarchical structures within our society, and kind of how we can organize to like radically change the way that we access care specifically, and then healthcare more broadly.
Interesting. And I have to say, so I was lucky enough to attend one of the performances as a home visit, and it was not at all what I had expected because I was imagining that there would be a typical interaction between, as often happens between myself and a medical expert, we'll say. Whereas, without giving too much away, I really felt that how you held that space really embodied a feminist ethic of care, whereby rather than being diagnosed and then told what to do, I was being invited from my experience and my expertise to improve my own and the collective situation of people with health conditions or affected, whether they're short-term or long-term. And that kind of takes me to the politics of aesthetics, which again, obviously that was a piece that a publication by Jacques Rancière, and he made a statement that rang so true for me in the waves of realization that followed after my experience of your exhibition, of being in the space, and as well as the performance. And what he said is that critical art is an art that aims to produce a new perception of the world and therefore create a commitment to its transformation. This schema, very simple in appearance, is actually the conjunction of three processes. First, the production of a sensory form of strangeness. And I think that really speaks to that kind of heightening that you were creating within the installation you made, Áine. Mm-hmm. And second, the development of an awareness of the reason for that strangeness, which comes through in the experience, I feel, and in the interaction with the pieces and the interaction with the performer. And thirdly, a mobilization of individuals as a result of that awareness. So in terms of that mobilization part of Rancière's statement, I'm curious about your views on arts-based health activism and whether that rings true for you or not, and really where this piece sits for you both politically and aesthetically.
Yeah. Well, I think I've thought a lot about whether or not this is like an activist work. I wasn't sort of intentionally setting out to create something that was like inherently activist or activism. But I think that the fact that we are having conversations about care, and the fact that I am attempting anyway to make people aware of inadequacies that they may not know about or may just not have experiences of, might be activist in itself. I would love to engage with healthcare professionals and have them experience this work and also get their feedback on, because I suppose I ask for people's thoughts on how we could change and where we could go from here, and I would love to engage with those people on what we could do, I suppose.
Something you said to me in the course of our conversation while I was looking up to chat with you after my visit to the exhibition was that if the current expectation on medical practitioners to kind of save or cure people could be changed, then maybe the actual relationship between patient and medic might change, and maybe the thinking around the particular conditions. And so in the course of kind of my own education around the themes of your work, I've come across the concept of pain as a disease as opposed to a cause that has a consequence and then can be cured. And for me, that frame of understanding is quite patriarchal insofar as there seems to be a linear cause and effect, and even our history is told in a linear way, whereas there are so many other factors that create the social dynamics that are that influence events within an experience of say a life experience of chronic pain. I know that there are so many unknown factors. For me, it's less linear, it's more cyclical, or maybe it's more spiral, but at the center of that experience is the patient as the expert and the person as the expert. And I'm really curious about, you know, you were saying you'd like to talk to medical practitioners to kind of bring them in and look at this together.
I mean, I'm not sure, like, I've tried to find out and done some research on the kind of teaching practices within like medical school, and I'm not sure how much detail, like there's so much obviously to learn. And for me anyway, it feels as though, like you were saying, often it's like, especially on a lower level, medical practitioners kind of feel this responsibility to fix a problem, to and also the things that they're able to offer you are limited when you're dealing with a chronic condition. So like, for example, with like chronic pain, or with any condition that kind of involves chronic pain, a lot of the time they might suggest things that are more like what they would describe as alternative therapies. Like for me, they have suggested many times that like I do acupuncture, or like take specific like herbal remedies or stuff like that. But that stuff isn't available. They can't prescribe that to me. They can't give me that on the medical card. And that's a huge problem. And the reason I feel like that they can't do that is because the way that it's set up is to fix something, is to fix a problem. And also, like you were saying, chronic pain is often seen as a symptom, rather than a disease in itself. And I do think somewhat that the term like fibromyalgia and the description of fibromyalgia as an illness itself is trying to get around that, and is trying to say this is a disease in itself, and therefore we can change our attitudes on how it's treated and how it's managed, and focus on like quality of life as the goal, like a good quality of life as the goal, versus like, I mean, it would be great if we could get rid of it, like fab, but the option, if you're not able to offer someone a complete fix, you shouldn't say, okay, bye, I don't have anything else to offer you. It's about having other things that we can be offered, whether that is alternative therapies or more holistic care. That needs to be kind of part of our health system, part of our health service. And like as I was saying before, it's no coincidence that like many of the people who have chronic pain are women. And it's kind of, unless you have money here, you can't access pain management. Like it's not possible. So I think that by describing it as a disease, it might be something that it changes attitudes in how we manage it, and kind of changes it from just being a symptom. But I also think that like just belief is really important at a smaller level, in like the first practitioners you meet when you start experiencing these symptoms. It's really important that they just believe you and listen to you. And I think that maybe comes from lots of things, like obviously their work conditions and their pay and their how they're taught to engage with patients. And then again, more broadly, comes from society and who we believe when they say they're in pain, and stuff like that. Sorry, it's a big question.
Yeah, it's a big question. And, you know, it keeps, a number of times you've kind of referenced the fact that this experience and you know, critical condition is not even acknowledged, because there's no space within the current system by which health and the body is understood for this to be. And so your work, I think, really kind of raises so many questions around that, and your approach to your own audience, I feel, kind of prompts those questions in going away. And I think, you know, it's I think it's very significant that your target audience is for people like myself that would have entered that space and been very ignorant about these experiences and the issues that they speak to as well. But I know that it's been important for you not just to reach a kind of maybe a more able-bodied audience that wouldn't have this insight or understanding, but also to work with people that very much have that experience. And your kind of approach to working with the group in Chronic Chats that you mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, I'd love to know a little bit more about that, and how you kind of created an entry point for people with similar experiences to feed into or respond to the work or have some exchange with yourself in its development.
Yeah, so I am like fully aware that I don't know everything about this, as much research as I can do, and it's a very like singular and isolating experience to live with these illnesses, and there's many different like variations of severity and everything, and I wanted to talk to other people that live with chronic illnesses, but I also wanted to create a space where we could sort of like share with each other if we wanted to, and also kind of use creativity and use like drawing to like relax and support each other. So Chronic Chats was I did it earlier in this year, kind of over Zoom because of coronavirus. But that actually opened it up a lot more and made it possible for more people to attend. So I did kind of like a trial group with 4 people earlier in the year. And the idea was that every week I would pick a subject. Like, for example, kind of one week we spoke about waiting rooms and like the aesthetics of waiting rooms and how, like on a small level, we could make those spaces more comfortable. So there's a drawing that's part of the exhibition that's of a waiting room. And then we all kind of had the option to draw our own waiting room or add in things that would make the waiting room more comfortable for us, as people who have spent a lot of time in them. And I suppose the idea was just to listen to each other's experiences and to use like coloring and creativity to relax and like be believed for an hour. And like I'm so grateful to all of the participants and that took part in that group, because it was so amazing for me and more valuable than just as a facilitator, if you know what I mean. Like it's always really like heartening to spend time with other chronically ill people who just get it and you don't have to explain anything. So I suppose, yeah, the goal of that group was like to create a space for us to meet each other, because it can be such an isolating experience, and also to use creativity to kind of relax a little bit or to share a bit more about specific themes or topics.
It's really interesting to me that something you've mentioned before when we've talked about, well, how does this relate to activism, is how much of an advocate you've had to be in your own life, and I presume other members of Chronic Chats have had to be also. So bringing these kind of advocates together within that space, it creates an interesting collective dynamic. I think it's a really, really rich piece of research, because it's really informed by the kind of affected group, if we can use that kind of activist phrase, and very much for me would speak to the ethos around, we'll say, disability justice activism that says nothing about us without us, that your process was very much informed by that kind of shared experience. And just so everybody knows, one of the outcomes of that was this beautiful zine, which has a collection of Áine's drawings, many of which you brought to the conversation in Chronic Chats, including the kind of conversation starter around the design of waiting rooms. That's available to buy in A4 Sounds shop, everybody. Support the artists, of course. But really interestingly, it's an interesting legacy as a really interesting piece of health literature that we can imagine being in waiting spaces. And even I'm imagining how that might change the dynamic of the experience for someone in a waiting space that comes across a piece of work like this, you know, that really has real understanding and, like you say, real acknowledgement of this experience. That, you know, we cannot, as you said, discount the fact that, you know, roughly 9 out of 10 people affected by chronic pain are female gendered, and you know, that speaks to maybe the questions around why this hasn't been supported or further research into it. Did you want to add something there, Áine?
I was just going to say thanks for plugging the zine. Also, yeah, it's kind of like interactive, and there's kind of activities for you to do. And I also wanted to say, if you are chronically ill and don't have much money, just like, you can email me or get in touch with me wherever, and I'll give you one.
Good, thanks, Áine. So look, I know that some of what we've discussed have touched on the questions that have been coming in from the audience here online. If there's any questions that people want to ask and they haven't done yet, as you said earlier, please feel free to submit those by chat. My last question for you, Áine, is where would you like this work to go next?
Well, like I was talking about before, I would really love to engage with some medical professionals and medical practitioners. Like, it's obviously not a great time to be asking them for help. They're busy. But in the future, I would really like to engage with them and hear their thoughts and like opinions, and also get, like, I suppose, perspective from the other side. Because obviously I'm fully aware that the system can be just as hard on medical practitioners as it is on us. I also, this work, or parts of this work, are going to be part of a group show in the lab in February, hopefully. As always, you know, pandemic depending.
That's the lab on Foley Street in Dublin?
Yeah, on Foley Street in Dublin.
Exciting.
So yeah, so it'll be happening again, hopefully. And as well as that, I'm going to run another round of chronic chats, I suppose, a bit more of a longer term, over a longer term, and with more resources. So I'm going to be running that with the support of Mayo Arts Office for chronically ill people in Mayo from next January. So I'm going to continue that kind of work, and yeah, then after that, I suppose we'll see.
I think I just think I want to congratulate you, Áine, on what you've achieved in a very challenging year, and also, but broader than that, you know, a very challenging field as well. And we have a couple of comments that have come in from those who are listening. One is from Paula Garrity. She says, "Thank you, Áine, on naming the elephant in the room. Chronic pain is so disruptive, and being believed is an important step in accessibility. Barriers to participating in society are very damaging to our self-esteem and ideas around self-worth." And she says, "Yay, Access Charter." I think that's definitely like
I think that, like, it's important. And as well, right now, we and lots of organizations have been given, you know, extra time, kind of time where there's not stuff happening in the venue, time where there's not stuff happening in the building, maybe a little bit of extra money because of events that didn't happen. It would be a great time for, and I'm aware that, like, many venues and art institutions are, but it would be a great time to start, like, using this maybe extra time, extra cash, to really think about access and think about, like, the diversity of it and how to make it better for everyone in Ireland, I suppose.
Great. And we had a comment from Megan Scott as well, just to say, really lovely activity book, very relaxing, and
Megan,
you know, not least because of the acknowledgements it makes. So look, I'll wrap up by encouraging everybody who's joined us here today. If you haven't seen the show already, please do make arrangements to do so. As you know, social distancing will be maintained, so bookings required, and you can do that through the A4 Sounds website. You can also see the live stream, so wherever you are in the country, you should be able to access it in that way. It is a really gorgeously installed work. And it's a very experiential piece, but I think a lot is translated in just being able to kind of see what's in that room and in that space. I'm sure, Áine, if people are in touch with or are interested in knowing more about chronic chats, they can get in touch with you via A4 as well.
Yeah.
One last question just came in I might put to you before we finish, and that's from Fala. She says that she thinks this would be fantastic in a healthcare setting, the actual installation. Do you think there is hope of getting work like this into a hospital, which is so often commissioning art around well-being?
I would love if this work could be put in a hospital setting. This year, I don't know. Maybe in the future, there might be more room for that. I would really love to engage with hospitals or medical settings to kind of change maybe the type of work that is like present in hospitals, and having something like an installation or something like, say, the sculptural piece of the chairs, I think would be a great conversation starter, and also would make it so like visible and accessible to so many people. I'd be hopeful for maybe like 2022, but probably
yeah,
not
I
next
mean,
year.
if there are people out there that would like to see this work in a healthcare setting, I think get in touch with your local healthcare provider and let them know about Áine O'Hara. Áine's kindly provided their the email address here, aineoharaart@gmail.com, in case anybody would like to get in touch. I'll end by saying, Áine, it's just been such a pleasure and such an education working with you over the past year. I'm almost sorry that we won't get a chance to be interacting as much anymore, but I'm certainly looking forward to following your practice and seeing what more developments. And if I can get to the lab, I'd definitely love to be there. For my part, I'd love to say just a massive thank you to A4 Sounds for supporting us to be able to have this talk today and doing it all so well and so professionally. Thanks so much, and with so much care and humor as always. And Áine, although it saddens me to wish you all the best in the All Ireland this year.
For anyone that doesn't know, I support a team that are they lose a lot, and they're playing today, and they probably will lose, and I'm going to watch them lose again in about an hour.
And we might as well support me from a not very Tipperary sore loser.
But aside from that, I would like to say thank you so much, Siobhán, for interviewing me, asking me these questions. I really appreciate it. And thanks so much to A4 Sounds for listening to me and being really flexible in terms of my access needs. And yeah, thanks to every single person that is watching this, whether now or in the future. And feel free, if anyone wants to email me or learn more about anything, feel free to email me on the email that I put in the chat, which is aineoharaart@gmail.com.
Brilliant. Thanks, Áine. We'll hand back to Evelyn now so that she can wrap up. Thanks everybody for joining us today, and thanks for your listening ears, and hopefully we'll interact in the future.
Hello everyone again. So thank you, Siobhán and Áine, for that. It was just really fantastic. Siobhán, such fantastic questions, and Áine, just such an insight to your practice. It really is, it just highlights the importance of your work, and that's just something so fantastic. Just a few thank yous before we go. So we'd like to thank the Arts Council for supporting We Only Want the Earth, our programme for 2020. And we'd also like to thank Fire Station Artist Studios, Dublin Central Housing Action for supporting this award, and also Kerry Guinan, who was the supporting artist. And again, thank you all for tuning in and listening. Take care.